The control console did not show up. What happened? What is this? As a mix of anxiety and doubt filled him, Manga tried activating other functions. None of them responded. It was as though he had been completely cut off from the system. What's going on? Rather, he should be thinking about what to do next. Where's the control interface for the fly spell? As he thought that, Manga suddenly realized that there was no need for it. Manga slowly lowered his altitude. What's going on? What is all this? Why can I use fly? No, wait, that's not all, is it? Manga had suddenly understood how to control the fly spell by feeling alone. He was not even conscious of it, it was as though it were perfectly natural. This was a very abnormal situation. After that, Manga looked at his hands. His left hand held the symbol of the guild, the staff of Ainz. His right hand held the launcher for the fireworks. It was true that nothing had changed. There was no doubt that those bony white hands belonged to Manga, just like in Yggdrasil. However, the sensation was different. Precisely detailing the difference was a little difficult, but there was a strong sense that those were his own hands. While they were the same hands from Yggdrasil, there was a perfectly natural feeling to them, like he was looking at his own hands from the real world. However, it was his ability to remain calm despite being in a situation like this which scared him more than anything. Unconsciously, Manga recalled the words his friend had once said. Anxiety is the seed of defeat, you must think logically and keep your cool at all times. Stay calm, broaden your vision, don't get caught up on small details, and let your thoughts flow. Ah, yes. His first consideration ought to be where's this place? If only there was someone I could ask. No, it would be better if there wasn't, right? Manga fell into contemplation as he descended toward the ground. Perhaps he should investigate his surroundings from the air with fly. Or not. Though it was a set of tumbled ruins, there were still many houses which retained their form within. There might be infiltrators there. It seemed like there might be someone hiding in the little alleys between the ruined houses peeking out at him. Open spaces might offer a good field of view, but it was essentially exposing oneself to the enemy. While he did not think that anyone would still be thinking of picking him in the face of this incomprehensible state of events, and it was possible that Manga was the only one who had ended up this way, he ought to move stealthily until he had unraveled this mystery. Also, Manga was holding the proof of the guild, the staff of Ainz. That ought to cut down on the probability of being picked. That being the case, this was the first measure he ought to take. Perfect Unknowable. Manga cast a spell. This was a high-tier spell that far surpassed invisibility. Now, he ought to be invisible, barring the use of some special spell or ability. Well, that was a trivial obstacle to a select group of players, it ought to reduce the chances of him being picked too. Manga looked at his bony white hands and looked down. He could still see himself, and there was no indicator which told him that he was invisible. All in all, he had no confidence that he really was invisible. As he descended, the details of the city gradually came into view. The residents had probably abandoned it quite a while ago, since he could see signs where houses had collapsed from rot. What happened to this city? More to the point, what on earth is going on now? Did Yggdrasil 2 start? Or is this a hidden event by the devs? Like say, being forcibly teleported here if you didn't log out at the end. But in that case, how do you explain this realism? He could not find the answer, no matter how he agonized over it. As he descended, Manga thought about using a skill. There were many kinds of skills, but using undead creation skills while invisible did him no good. All it would do was expose his position. Well, he could use them to set a trap. Given the present circumstances, it might make someone who could have been friendly become suspicious instead. Should I cover my face up? No, it feels like people who cover their faces are suspicious, good grief. Manga activated one of his skills. It was the ability to detect undead. In Yggdrasil, places like this often had undead in them. As such, Manga had used the skill almost subconsciously. As he did, the skill told Manga a piece of bad news. Manga had originally been descending slowly, but now he suddenly plunged down at great speed and hid himself in a two-story building whose roof had collapsed. The speed of his descent threw up a cloud of dust. Manga hurriedly waved his arm to try and settle it, but to no avail. It was a fairly spacious room. The furniture inside had been crushed under the fallen roof, and after exposure to the elements they had completely rotted away. He maintained his fly spell so his feet did not touch the ground. This was because he had considered the possibility that the floorboards might collapse. If he continued observing the situation in this way, he ought to be able to learn more about it. However, Manga had something more important to think about. What the hell's going on? Why is the surrounding area full of undead reactions? Where on earth was I teleported to? The fact was, Manga had glanced toward an area bearing an undead response before he had ducked into this house, and he had definitely seen a human-like figure there. Its uncoordinated movements were most certainly not those of a living creature. Manga remained still as he pressed himself to the wall and focused all his energies on spying on the outside. Even if he could detect the undead, he could not determine their strength. The most powerful undead creatures included beings that could see through perfect unknowable. Right now, there were two things that Manga ought to do. One of them was to leave, to be precise, go far away from this place until the undead reactions vanished. The other was to investigate the level and so on of the undead creatures, and if they were of a level he could handle, find out where exactly he was. He ought to pick one of those options. However, there was no guarantee that he would be safe if he left. In that case, it would be better to stay here and investigate the undead reactions. In addition, Manga was one of the undead as well, so it was very likely that he would not be attacked, as long as he took no hostile actions. Well, assuming it's really just undead out there. Manga recalled the feeling of using the fly spell, and confidence welled up in him. It'll be fine. I don't know why, but I'm confident that I won't have any problems casting attack spells too. No, this actually feels kind of bad. I don't feel like myself anymore. No. I'll think about that problem later. More importantly, I'll have any number of ways to escape as long as I can cast teleportation. If anything happens, all I need to do is teleport into the air, to a distance that lets me escape. Manga looked around, then at the floor which was covered in the remains of the collapsed ceiling, and then at the ruins of the roof. It will collapse, I hope. Talking to himself was a sign of uneasiness. The character called Manga would be fine even if the roof fell on him. But that was ultimately an Yggdrasil thing, and even if he could use his spells and skills normally, there was no guarantee that his body would function the same way it did in the game. Then again, I have these eyes. I can use my dark vision normally too. Should I assume my passive skills are functioning normally as well? Speaking of which, isn't the tech level here a bit low? This building did not use steel rebar concrete. The debris scattered at his feet was hard to make out, given that it had been thoroughly pulverized, but it looked to have been made of wood and bricks. Is this still Yggdrasil after all? No, although it feels like the answer ought to be close to it. No matter how he thought about it, this simply was not the real world. But even if that were the case, it still left many questions unanswered. Manga put that question aside for the time being and cast a spell. He started with message. He ought to see if he could contact someone else, whether it was a GM or another player. After a while, he began to grumble. I can't connect, huh? He could not contact anyone, and neither could he log out. It was as though he was trapped in this world. Then next, let's try looking around the surroundings to gather information. In that case, I'll use remote viewing. He created a magical sensor and let it float in the air. This was a bet. It would be a pain if there were undead that could see through invisibility, but it would be worse if the opposition had ways to interfere with detection spells or even to counterattack against divinations. However, what Manga felt afterwards was confusion. What the heck is this? What he saw now was completely different than in Yggdrasil. In Yggdrasil, using remote viewing would create a viewing window in the corner of his vision. One could adjust the window's size at will, but fundamentally it would be depicted as a different image. However, it was different now. It was as though he had opened a new set of eyes, and with it, another field of vision. He did not know whether to call it fascinating or bizarre. Still, it was not a problem. It felt natural to him, and he could operate the spell as normal. He even felt that he had completely changed. Manga ignored his brief confusion and used remote viewing to catch sight of the undead creature. A man was stumbling along, in a mindless lurch. There were cloudy eyes beneath the opened lids, and he showed no signs of blinking. It would seem this was not a high-level undead being. Rather, it was a low-level one, a zombie. Only, a zombie's appearance was typically very gruesome, but not in the case of this undead being. It did not look like it had suffered major damage or was badly rotted. It looked just like a clean corpse moving around. An undead being like this, if this were Yggdrasil, no, why am I thinking about this like it's not Yggdrasil? This might be some big patch, but after the servers shut down. How could that be? Manga suddenly realized something, and he shouted in a voice that would not agitate the nearby zombies. This is illegal. It's illegal confinement. Let me out of here. If this really was in the game, and if someone was managing it, then it was very likely that those words would be recorded. The Computer Act mandated helmet that Suzuki Satoru was wearing would also record it. If the company noticed, they would probably take some kind of action. However, he did not see any response along those lines. As I thought, this isn't Yggdrasil after all. I don't think the company would gain anything by deliberately targeting me for a crime either. But the game becoming reality or what it is impo. Or is it not impossible? Plus, the fact that I'm using these skills and spells like they were part of me is also extremely weird. Manga shook his head. That was also very important, but his priority now was to take stock of the situation around him. He had to protect himself first. If he died, would the game end with him logging out, or would it just be the end because this was now reality? Manga let the spell-created sensor float past the male zombie's eyes. There was no response. The man continued shambling forward. He couldn't see it, so can I be sure it's a zombie? As he watched the man leave, Manga let the remote viewing sensor continue down the road. He encountered over 10 more undead beings on the road, and they were all the same zombies. Still, there sure are a lot of them. Some of them were walking around in circles inside their houses, and others roamed up and down the streets. It looked like the entire city was under the rule of the undead. That said, this was hardly strange in Yggdrasil. In truth, there were quite a few underground cities there which were ruled by the undead. Among them included locations which could be converted into bases after defeating the boss monsters within.